All right. I'm going to steal a line from Rob Walsh and Elsie Escobar at Libsyn and say, good generic time of the day to you, my friend. Thanks for watching this, whether you're watching it live or you're watching it after the fact. I appreciate you for checking out this presentation, and I hope that you find it valuable. So this is a presentation that I originally gave at Podcast Movement 2017 in Anaheim at the end of August. And let me put my plug in here. If you are not currently registered for Podcast Movement 2018, it's going to be in Philadelphia in July. If you're not registered, go ahead and register and take advantage of this great opportunity. Podcast Movement in particular it's the conference for podcasters. There were right around 2,000 podcasters in Anaheim this past August for this event, and the amount of networking, the amount of education that you can cram into your skull over the course of a couple of days or over the course of a year if you get the virtual ticket, which I highly recommend you do. You would have access to my presentation if you had the virtual ticket from Podcast Movement 2017. You could watch it anytime you wanted to. But I wanted to put it up here, and actually I thought because it's not live, the slides will be more clear. You can see them instead of me. And so maybe this will be a value for people even that did go to Podcast Movement. So this is scripting your podcast without sounding scripted. Me talk good, and you can too. So I've spent years behind the microphone. I've heard for years before that I had a great voice, a voice for radio. But getting a job in radio actually taught me that it's more than just nature that makes a broadcaster. It's more than a whiskey habit. It's more than a pack of smokes. So that's what I'm here to share with you today. Me talk good, and you can too. I got my first gig in radio in 2004, straight out of college. I was a poli-sci major, a theater major, and I didn't know how to do anything else but talk. Gary McKinney, who is now at, he's at a company that is now called Red Peach Radio, or Red Peach Media in Ruston, Louisiana. He's the one that gave me my first job. He was a great boss. And those adorable little girls and that hottie there, they spent a week at Disneyland while I was given this presentation originally, along with two brothers that aren't pictured here yet. I've been podcasting now since 2012. I'm now in business for myself as an editor, a producer, a consultant, and a voice artist. All that to say, I know a thing or two about talking extemporaneously and from a script. Go Cedar Creek Cougars. I called play-by-play for the local high school in Ruston for 4 seasons. My wife and I host a tailgate party show for Louisiana Tech football in the fall on our local 100,000 watt FM station. That's Z107.5. Or online, you can find the Big Z Country app for your iPhone or Android. And so I want to share some of the tips that I use personally to help sound more extemporaneous, but also more prepared on your podcast. These are tips that I've learned through personal experience and exposure to play-by-play announcers and radio broadcasters and preachers. So these folks have all taught us a lot, and they've got a lot more to teach us, I think. Maybe at the head of the line is the guy that I want to quote today. He's a coach, a former broadcaster, an artist of the English language in a lot of ways. I give you John Madden. So I believe that this is absolutely true. And that's why we're going to keep it to just 3 basic ideas today. 3 things to wrap your mind around for better sounding shows. My wife said that she was totally on board with these until the 3rd one. She says the rest of it makes sense in her classroom. They make sense as a parent, but she doesn't do any post-processing on our kids. Funny enough, preachers and play-by-play announcers don't get to do much post-processing either. But that is one of the great advantages that we have as podcasters, and that's where we're really going to pay off the rest of this work. Before we get to any of that, though, you need to make sure that you understand what we're doing. Some of us are going to be creating this podcast as part of our business or most of our business income. Some of us are just hobbyists, doing it for a passion or for a pastime. There's nothing wrong with either and both. They're welcome in this conversation especially. And both of those ideas and both of those categories can get a lot out of this. But first and foremost, you need to make sure you're confident in what you're doing and why you're doing it. No one is making us do this. Even if you're producing a podcast for money, you can walk away today. I've had friends who have shut down successful shows with hundreds of dollars in Patreon support because it wasn't where they wanted to be and not what they wanted to talk about. If it's not, it's never going to work long term. So, square that away first. Find something you're confident in. But once you find it, go whole hog, so to speak, right? Load that wagon up, as Mr. Madden says, and get on down the road. Blind horse or no. Our first P, preparation. And before I get an Eagle Scout correcting me in the hallway, I know that this is the Boy Scout motto, and these are Cub Scouts. My Cub Scouts, in fact. But it was a cheap opportunity to show off my cute kids. That's my oldest in the middle, 9 now. That's Judah. Remy on the left-hand side there is 8. And the girls are twins, 3.5 years old, almost 4 now. All right, let's prepare. You've got to know your topic. You've got to know the source material, know the backstory. When I was attending my last bowl game at TCU last year with Louisiana Tech, our Hall of Fame play-by-play guy, he's currently, I think, the 3rd longest tenured announcer in the nation, Dave Nitz. He's a great guy. When he started calling the game, if he hadn't known and referenced the fact that this was Louisiana Tech's 3rd straight bowl game, first time in program history to do that, it would have nagged you the whole game. He would have looked like a fraud, or at best, uninterested. The same thing for a preacher. I've got to know who the primary players are. I went to lunch not too long ago with my associate pastor, Leslie Stevens. She's awesome. She was telling me about a time when she preached an entire sermon on Ruth. Great story in the Old Testament, but she used the name Rahab for the entire sermon. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with the Old Testament, but there's not a lot of female figures. But the ones that there are there, you really need to keep it straight. It's basically princesses, prophetesses, and prostitutes. You don't want to mix those 3 up. The same thing for your podcast, too. If you've got a guest, have a piece of paper or a screen with the name of that guest and the name of their business or show, their website that you're going to reference. As a man with a podcast review show and quite a few 1-star reviews mentioning times in those early shows where we got the show host names wrong, just don't do that. Don't be like me. So this next one is the reason why there are probably half a dozen churches of the same denomination in your town. It's also the reason why you've got your favorite announcer when ESPN covers your college team as opposed to just the local announce crew. What's your angle? This is your podcast that we're talking about, not the guests. I know that a lot of people choose the interview format in particular because guests, be they expert or celebrity, can offer big boosts in your audience, as well as tremendous value to that audience. But folks, don't bring them on the show without an idea of what you, and therefore your audience, want from them. If you're a preacher, you might be moved by the Spirit, but you are seeking to cause action. You are looking for a response. You have an agenda. Increase tithing. Open the congregation's heart to the immigrant crisis. Spark someone to volunteer for the children's ministry. Get the new building funded, whatever. The preacher is interpreting that source material and tailoring the message for a purpose. So what's yours in your show? Has anyone ever heard the story of the country preacher who only had one couple show up for a service? It's Sunday night. The preacher goes out there a little early, but he's alone. Finally, one couple shows up, a farmer and his wife. The preacher greets them. He gets them settled. And then the preacher's pacing in the foyer. It's time for service now. He comes up to the pulpit. He says, brother and sister, let's wait a few more minutes on our fellow congregants. Maybe they're just running late. So they give it 5 more minutes, then 10 minutes. Finally, the preacher stands up again, and a little dejected this time, and says, well, folks, I guess we should just call it a night and head on home ourselves. No sense having service all alone. The farmer stands up in the pew, and he says, now, preacher, when I go out to feed my cows, and don't but 1 or 2 of them come up to the fence, I don't give up on the herd. I go ahead and feed those few. And the farmer sits back down and crosses his arms. The preacher is floored. He says, brother, you are absolutely right. I apologize for my thoughtlessness. Let's begin. And so he takes the pulpit, and he starts preaching what turns out to be quite an amazing sermon. He is really feeling it, so to speak, and is making connections that he had never made in his research before. Suddenly, he's been preaching 30 minutes, then 45 minutes. Now it's been an hour since the farmer fussed at him, and the preacher is drenched in sweat, and he's still just rolling along, obviously nowhere near a wrap-up on this sermon. And the farmer suddenly stands back up in his pew, raises his hand, and the preacher stops. Yes, brother, can I get an amen? And the farmer lowers his hand and says, preacher, when I go out there and feed my cows and don't but a couple show up to eat, I do feed those cows, but I generally don't put out all the feed. And he sits back down. Point made as the preacher begins the benediction. So, how long is your show? Don't lay out all the feed, right? Same thing in play-by-play. If your halftime show is 30 minutes and you've got 10 minutes of commercial break, you can play that 15-minute coach's show, but you don't also get to do a game-by-game season recap unless it's just week 2. How long is your show? Know that podcasting means that there's no time limit, but the amount of material you capture, particularly that's worthwhile, will determine how long your episode should end up being. So, the other thing here is to ask your audience. If you have a relationship with your audience, if you've got a Facebook community, if you've got an email list at all, or just if they email you on occasion, ask them directly in the show. Say, we're thinking about a format change. We're thinking about the length of the show. What do you want? Here's something else to think about. As far as statistics go, if you look at your stats and your week-to-week growth is not very large, but you're getting a huge churn in your back catalog, lots of extra downloads in your back episodes, one of the things that might indicate to me is that your audience are rabid fans, small though they may be, and that they are returning to old episodes and listening again and again and again. That suggests to me that they want more content from you. Produce more, whether it's more than 1 episode a week, whether it's longer episodes, etc. Ask your audience. They'll tell you what they want. Ask the cows how much feed they need. Artful turns of phrase. So this is an idea that I actually stole from one of my college professors. My freshman year at Louisiana Tech, there was a professor by the name of John Price. He was a poli-sci professor, but in my first quarter, he announced he was retiring. And so I loved him. I thought he was great. He was a legend on campus. And so that year, I decided to take basically every class that he taught. I think I did take every class that he taught. So I took a bunch of stuff that was way above my head. I took philosophy. I took a bunch of scope and methods of research in social science and all these like 300, 400 level classes as a freshman. It was a bad idea. But I got to spend a lot of time with him. And one of the things that he told me in our discussions was that he didn't script his lectures. He had an outline, obviously, for his lectures. And the other thing that he would look for is an artful turn of phrase. He knew the point that he was trying to make. And he had, coalesced a lot of poetry into his mind over time. And he would try to find something that was pithy, something that was memorable, something that was quotable, something that was catchy. Maybe it is poetry. But you use that as a sort of a signpost throughout your presentation. And you don't have to script the whole thing, but those artful turns of phrase can take what seems like a normal conversation and elevate it to a professional, polished, presentation. In the story about the country preacher, for instance, I didn't script out that whole joke, but I did think and write out the phrases, feed those few and begins the benediction. Those are shortcuts to eloquence. Write some of that stuff beforehand. Think about Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, even, decades later, is known for his wit and witticism. The reason that is because he would literally spend a lot of his free time writing quips to and about the topics that he knew he would be asked about and the people he knew he would be asked about. I've been editing my own podcast since 2012. I used to edit about a dozen shows or so for Red Peach Radio. I've got about 24 recurring clients currently that I handle personally. Since 2012, I've probably edited 3,000 podcasts, episodes, I should say. This is my least favorite question of all time. I've done it. I've got clients that have done it. But this is not something that you're likely to escape entirely. It is something that you've got to be conscious of and try over time to excise. Preparation can make sure you do that. Know who you're talking to. You do, don't you? I mean, you're not cold calling people on your podcast, are you? Maybe so. Maybe that's your format. But if you're not, don't ask them, who are you and what do you do? You provide the entry point to your podcast and to that episode for the guest into your audience. You make sure that they're driving toward the agenda and toward the topic, toward the angle that you want to present for your audience. It's your show, not theirs. Now, if we're sharing a message that we believe in, like I said at the beginning, and if we're thinking about our own goals for the discussion or interview, or solo recording for that matter, then listening to things we don't want to hear and, seeing things that we don't want to see shouldn't be a problem for us or shouldn't be much of a problem. When it is, then you either need to hire a new guest booker or you need to get focused about your show topic. Remember your goals, your agenda. You do not need to be so focused on producing another episode and scheduling that next guest that you bring on someone that doesn't have the message that you want to present, or you share a topic that isn't right for your audience. All right, let's talk about participation. The pastor that I grew up with as a kid was named James Bullock. He had this crazy 70s bouffant hairdo. It was huge, glorious, and unchanging for like the 15 years that he was my pastor. Occasionally, he would lead children's church. You have all the kids come down to the front. They didn't do it every Sunday. It was a very small church. Frankly, there weren't that many kids there. If my sister and I missed, there might not be any children. But when they did, it was really cool. He was very, very good at that. One of the lessons that I remember most was about paying attention in church, basically. Listening even when it seemed like it wasn't interesting to you or for you. I can't remember the whole story, but the line that stuck with me, and I know that he wrote it down, actually. I found out while working on this presentation that it's an old nursery rhyme. The lesson at the end, though, was this. The wise old owl lived in an oak. The more he saw, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. Now, wasn't he a wise old bird? We've got to be wise old birds. No matter how young and amazing we are, you've got to listen twice as much as you talk. And this goes even for solo hosts, by the way. Don't think that you get off on this one. You need to know what you're saying and how it sounds. How can we listen twice as much as we talk? We wear our headphones, first of all. Wear your headphones. Participate. Don't just free associate into the next question or topic. This is even more important with interviews, though. You have to be present so that you can maintain that roadmap to where you want to go with the conversation, what you want to get out of the episode or interview or discussion. This last one goes for everyone. Take notes while you are recording. It blows my mind when I hear that podcasters don't do this. Personally, I like to do it with my iPad or the phone. You put it into airplane mode while you're recording so you know that you're not going to get digital interference. It makes a great notebook. Pen and paper works fine too, though. Take notes with timestamps. For the last P, the one that separates us from play-by-play announcer and preacher, except maybe televangelist, I guess, post-production. This is why you're taking these notes with timestamps. There are all sorts of things that you can do with your content, or you can have a professional editor do with your content. But if you don't take notes, you lose those opportunities. All right, so let's go to post-processing. This is another cheap shot to win your favor with cute kiddos here. They're celebrating a big win last year for my Bulldogs, but as Coach Skip Holtz would point out, and our fans can tell you, after an embarrassing loss to a local school, Northwestern, a few years ago, you can't celebrate until you finish. I know that there are a lot of podcasters, great podcasters even, some of them were at Podcast Movement this year, that push the idea of live-to-tape recording and minimal, if any, editing. I am not one of those podcasters. I disagree with them. I do think that their techniques are important for all of us. We need to pay attention because we can limit the need for editing. That's very helpful to everyone. Limiting the amount of work needed to polish your particular podcast will save you a lot of time or money or both. But why the heck wouldn't you take advantage of what sets us apart from radio? What sets us apart from the play-by-play announcers, the preachers that I've been looking to here for pointers? Why not use what makes us special, the on-demand subscription model of podcasts that enables you to emulate the big production teams all on your own or with just a single contractor or two? Why wouldn't we do it? No, editing is not fun, even for someone who literally does it all day, every day. It is my bread and butter, literally. I eat on podcasting money. But it's still not fun. Madden is right here. If you want your show to sound like Roman Mars's show, like Aaron Mahnke's show, you've got to climb around in the edit bay like Roman Mars does. All right, here are a few things that I'm not here to do today. I'm not here to make your life or even your podcast harder. I'm not here to make you hire an editor either. Personally, I think if you are not currently or don't plan on shortly making money from your podcast, I don't think you should hire an editor. Unless you make an hourly rate so high in your career that it makes it silly for you not to hire it out. But what I am here to do is to make your show better. My podcast is called Always Listening, and I'm always listening to something. I want more and better shows to exist. So this is all very selfish. Post-processing. First of all, it's how the show sounds. This is where sound engineering comes in. If you don't hire this out, there are online tutorials for free on YouTube. Search for your preferred audio editor, podcast editing. I bet you get dozens of good videos you could watch if you want to take the time. Or you can hire it out through people like me or automation like Auphonic.com. Auphonic is the best one in my opinion. There are some other ones out there. Podcasting is a lot like radio, but in many ways, to me, it's almost more like movies because of post-processing. Think of your favorite shot from an action film, the big stunt that takes your breath away. That takes dozens, if not hundreds of hours to get right. Never mind the possible CGI work, all of the special effect wizardry that goes into the final product. Your podcast doesn't need CGI. You don't have to build a supercomputer, but if you take notes, remove your stutters and stumbles, the repetitive parts of your questions, the potholes in discussion, if you take all of that stuff out, then you'll realize that you're going to have a better prepared, more collected, smarter sounding show that will actually need less post-processing over time because this is going to become a habit for you. So let me give you an example of how this is going to pay off for you. If you have an expert or a celebrity on, and then you deliver an episode devoid of all their ums and ahs, their, well, man, it's like the thing was, it was just, like the thing, You cut that out. Cut it out of the show. You don't need it. They will notice, though. And it'll be your show that gets the return trip instead of your competitor, or your show that gets the recommend for the friend, celebrity, or expert, or whatever. This is true, though, too, if you're a solo show, even if you don't have guests. Let's say that this podcast feeds your business, or feeds your income at least. Why would you put this great public face, this intimate art form that is podcasting, why would you put it out and sound like an amateur? You're not an amateur. You are a professional. Even if you're not a professional podcaster, sound like one. The last thing here is really the first thing about the show itself. What do you want to say? When you listen to the final product, is that what it says? If it's not, don't put it out. People talk about consistency and the importance of consistency, coming out the same time, the same day, every week. That's true. That's great. But consistency is also about tone and quality, not just time and day of the week. If you can be consistent in time as well, wonderful. But if you can't, put out a consistently good show first. Your audience cares about your show, and they'll care more if you do too. If you've taken those timestamps of the bad stuff and the best stuff, guess what you can do with that? You can put those timestamps in your show notes. You can even embed them in the file if you want to take the extra time to do that. You can pull the most interesting sections for short soundbite clips, make waves or audiograms with them. People aren't going to watch your 1 hour podcast on Facebook. They're just not. I'm sorry, but they're not. But they might be drawn to your episode because of the 15-second clip that they watched on your feed. So, how do you implement this post-processing without just spending hours on hours on hours? So Alphonic has already been mentioned here once, but it's a great service. They can handle your mixing, your sound engineering, etc. But they've also got some very simple editing tools. If you are just looking to put an intro and outro in, you can do that with Alphonic. Now, I don't recommend them as an editor. It's not my preferred solution, but if that's really all you want to do, if you're all about limiting your time, at least take advantage of that. And here's the other thing too. If you're producing less than 2 hours of content a month, 2 hours or less of content a month, let's say you're making a 20-minute show once a week, for instance, okay? You can use Alphonic absolutely free of charge. It costs you nothing to use. Get a free account. You could process your 2 hours a month through there. I personally use the iPad. The iPad Pro is my device of choice for editing, and I use this app called Ferrite, Ferrite. And you could search for that. It's actually free to try. It's about $20 to unlock all the in-app purchases. It's for iOS, so it works on iPhone and iPad as well. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I've got a course at iPadpodcasting.com that you can sign up for right now and learn all about using Ferrite. There are apps on the Android side as well. One that I can recommend is BossJock. I believe its Android client is actually a little bit more full-featured than the iOS version. Ferrite's just the one that I use the most and the one that I recommend if you're looking to edit on the iPad. For Windows, Mac, desktop, laptop computers, Audacity is the big one. It's free. My man Daniel J. Lewis is going to get you set up completely there. He's got lots of free videos, podcasts from him, tons of informational material. Others are available online as well, but Daniel J. Lewis I can recommend to get your skills up to speed if you're using Audacity. Personally, I use Adobe Audition when I'm on the Mac or the desktop. It's expensive, though. It's an ongoing monthly subscription to keep the latest version. And now, if you use other Adobe products, if you're a Photoshop user, if you use Premiere for video editing or something like that, then you've probably already got access to Adobe Audition through your subscription. But if not, it's about $21 a month, I think, for Audition, so that one gets expensive quickly. Reaper is a good in-between model for the Mac and PC as well. It's about $60 for a license for that. Hindenburg Journalist is another good one. I think the basic version is about $100, and then there's a pro version that's about $200, I think, or so. Hindenburg and Reaper, there are lots of tutorials online for those as well. GarageBand. I left GarageBand to the end here because it is very capable and it is available. If you own a Mac, you have it already. It's included. But any recent version of this has removed a lot of the podcast-specific features that they used to include, and generally, I just don't think that it's well suited to the purpose. So I try to steer people to Audacity if they're looking for something free, even on the Mac side. The point is that there is software. There is know-how available, YouTube tutorials on all of these, podcasts available for many of them, blogs written with, how-to guides on using all of these pieces of software for podcasting. Schedule yourself a weekend. Say, I'm going to learn how to use the real features that I need that would gain me speed and efficiency and quality as an editor for my own show. Set aside a weekend and do that for yourself. You'll save time. It'll pay dividends on your show. And even if you end up hiring it out in the end because you have built a business around or because of your show, even if you hire it out, you'll be better as a manager for that hired editor because you know what's possible and how it's possible in the editing software. So that's my big push. Get competent. All right. I'm going to let Madden wrap this up for us, folks. I am ready for the congratulations. I know it was a good presentation. I'm ready for the criticisms too. I'd love to hear from you after this. If you've got questions or comments, you can always email me, joel@propodcastingservices.com. You can message me here on Facebook too. And I'm excited to chat more with any of you that would like to talk about this. Here's the one thing. I said I wasn't here to get you to hire an editor, but I will say again, if your show makes you money or you plan for it to very soon, if your hourly rate is high enough that you could hire someone cheaper than hiring yourself as an editor, and you'd be surprised how low that figure can be depending upon where you look and what level of editing you want, then join these folks over here. And, there are a ton of great production companies like my own that are available. Find one that works for you in your price range. Ask your friends that produce podcasts who they use as an editor or who their friends use as an editor. And then come check me out if you'd like, propodcastingservices.com. Or, of course, you can go to propodcastingschool.com too and take a couple of great courses that are on sale right now. Podcasting 101 is available for free. All you got to do is register at my school, propodcastingschool.com. Podcasting 201 is on sale, and if you take the 101 course, there might be a coupon code in there for you. And also starting at the beginning of October and available for everybody is iPadpodcasting.com too. I'm teaching a whole course on iPad podcasting or using your iPhone or iPad to record, to edit, to produce, and to publish your own podcast straight to your media host and out to the world, all using iOS. Very, very cool stuff. And if that sounds like it's for you, then check me out at iPadpodcasting.com and sign up today. All right. Thanks for sitting through this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And I am always listening.